Today I want to talk about one of the many women that inspire me. I was thinking about who I would talk about, and I prayed to God, asking Him who He thought I should start with. And I've been reading a book on women with extraordinary faith by Ace Collins each morning for the past month. I enjoy each morning. I wake up early to drink my 1 cup of coffee and watch the sunrise and meditate on things of beauty, gratefulness, and enlightenment. I've been enjoying the show Timeless in the evening, and that very night, the next episode was about Harriet Tubman, who I had just read about in my book only a few days before. Okay, thanks. I guess I know who to start with. Next, my husband told me that there was a movie on Netflix about her, and sure enough, it was filmed in 2019. The funniest thing about finding my answer was that the book I had been reading was something my father had given my mother many years ago, and for some reason I had it on my shelf all the time. I'm not sure she had even read it, but it called to me to be the next thing I studied. She was a small woman like me. I love to hear about women who are underestimated. She was called the Moses of her time because she helped slaves escape in the dark of night during a time when there was no hope of being freed due to the laws that were in place. She understood risk better than most because she grew up as a slave, beaten and abused until one day she had had enough and she decided to make a run for it. And in 1849, all she had to do was get to Pennsylvania state line, and she would be free. But 8 years later, she had to get all the way to Canada to do the same. She was middle-aged, barely 5 feet tall. She didn't look like a person who could outrun the U.S. government. And against all odds, she made the trek over 12 times, hundreds of miles through rugged terrain, with the journey ending in another nation to help people become free. She was a wanted woman with a price of $40,000 on her head. At that time, that's a lot. The plantation owners feared that their slaves would vanish in the night, and it was all because of her. As she met each of the groups, she liked to tell the story of Moses. She liked to explain that he was an ordinary man. He seemed unsuited for leadership. He lacked the necessary skills to inspire anyone. And yet with God's help, he did miracles and led his people out of bondage. Harriet had war wounds. She knew exactly what they were going through. She'd been beaten so hard that she almost died from her injuries. She carried a large scar on her forehead from stepping in front of someone who was going to get a beating. She ended up with random headaches from the hit on the head that gave her visions of what she needed to do to help others become free. Everyone thought she was dying, probably a seizure, but when she woke up, she would be refreshed and know exactly what to do. Her message was that God came for all people, not just for those who claimed to be their owners. I'm sure her family and friends thought she was crazy at first. Why put yourself out there? Why bother to help others? Why put yourself in danger repeatedly? Gaining her own freedom had not been enough to satisfy her soul, and she was driven to bring that freedom to as many as she could. She knew her purpose, and all the trials she had went through molded her into the person that she needed to be to take on this monumental challenge. During the Civil War, Harriet felt she needed help and she worked as a nurse, and she was assigned to the Gullen people of the Sea Islands off the coast of South Carolina, and she set up programs to help ex-slaves. And she became a spy for the government, finding weak points in the enemy lines. She even led several raids that destroyed bridges and railroads. And when the war ended, she was a legend throughout the country, and she thought she'd finally broken through the barriers and was going to be treated as an equal in American society. Sadly, she was only paid $200 for her 4 years of service. She felt lost, and she thought she was not put on this earth to tarry, and she looked for a new purpose, and she thought of her own limitations as she had never learned to read and write. think of how smart she must have been to accomplish so much without those skills to help her. She realized that people that she helped free would not survive if they did not have these basic skills. So she set about establishing schools for them to learn educational skills. And through her hard work, thousands learned to read and write. She helped them to gain a sense of self-worth and independence. While she was canvassing for funds to set up the school, she noticed another need. She noticed that the young and the very old were struggling to get by. The homeless were everywhere. The government and many of the churches didn't feel any compassion for these people, struggling to find a place to sleep or a meal to eat. She got married, she adopted some children. She ended up with 22 people living at her home, a blind woman with 4 of her own children, and some older people who had nowhere else to go. She spent her life in service of others. To make ends meet, she raised chickens, pigs, cows, tended a huge amount of gardens, and when people asked her, why would you work so hard, she told them to read Matthew 25:35 through 40, and she said, these people represent Christ, and it's my job to help the poor and the needy and the forgotten. To finance her efforts, she wrote a book, Scenes of the Life of Harriet Tubman. Queen Victoria even honored her for her service. And the last thing that Harriet created was a home for ex-slaves in their old age. She knew they would struggle and wanted to help, and she moved in there herself shortly before she died. In the movies, heroes think dependence is a weak quality. We are actually made to be dependent on God. God uses ordinary people like you and me. For that very reason, my huge need to help myself and to help others heal became a great opportunity to do something exciting. God's been there through many hard parts of my life, but in the past, when things got easy, I would always say, okay, Lord, I can take it from here. I would say, I've got this, and I'd put him somewhere on the back burner. Apparently, God had been waiting for me to be dependent on him. I hadn't needed to live each moment by faith. I'm attempting something so big that failure is almost guaranteed unless God steps in. I believe this is how Harriet Tubman must have felt as she helped more than 300 slaves to freedom and started her life of servitude. I'm here to push you into trying something new. It's going to require your courage, your effort, your time, your money. It's going to seem like I'm setting you up to risk, to look like a fool or a loser. Healing from sexual abuse in my childhood in the past 2 years has been a great journey of struggles, self-awareness, and triumph. Now it's time for me to share what I've learned with the world. Check out the link below to see what Little Girl Greatness is all about. I thank you for watching, and I pray you have a wonderful day. And if you feel the need to share this, please do.